Hey, psych students, welcome to Chapter 8, Human Development. As you can see by the screen, you can kind of tell this is going to be a pretty lengthy chapter based on all of the videos that I have here for you. So we've got 3 study hall videos and we have 3 OG crash course videos. All of them are great. They give you a really in-depth understanding into human development. And this is one of the kind of key chapters because we talk about theorists, about growth and development, both emotionally and socially, cognitively. So it's a really important chapter. And it's one of those chapters that, is also offered at a semester as a semester course. And it's called Human Development. So if you are interested in studying and research human development from birth to death, it's the entire lifespan, this would be a great chapter for you to, get into. All right, so these are all the components that we are going to talk about. So moral development, active development, exploring development, gender development, socio-emotional development, death, dying, and grieving, cognitive development, and physical development. So as you can see, it's every single element of you as a human being. All right, so textbook definition. What is development? It is the pattern of continuity and change in human capabilities that occurs throughout the life. So throughout your life. When, we think about development, many people just think about, when someone is born, right? But this actually goes through the whole course of your life. And when we look at that, we look at growth and decline. All right, now when you research in developmental psychology, you either research at, one point in time, or you research longitudinally, so throughout a longer span. So the age-related differences, when you're going to implement a cross-sectional study, that is when you're going to look at maybe a cohort or a group of people at one point in time, and with that you're going to have cohort effects. Then you also are going to look at it in a longitudinal perspective. So in those studies, you're going to look at people over multiple points over time. So it might be, every two years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, but it's going to be over a longer span of time. And it just depends on whatever the study is, how long that study will be. All right. So one thing to really note in psychology in general is the nature nurture debate is the biggest debate in psychology. So half of you is biological, that's the nature side. And then the other half of you is your environmental side, the nurture, what you get from the outside, outside elements and your experiences and people that influence you. So half of that are your genetics. You can't do anything about that, right? It's just what you're born with. And that other half are your surroundings. And then we can't forget you as the self. So you as the person, the individual, takes active roles in their own development. All right, so genes and the environment. I'm going to kind of run through some of the stuff because it can get a little bit, it can get a little bit, I don't want to say boring, but it can get a little bit, just redundant. So, you could just take a look at that and, if you want to dive deeper, go ahead, go into the text. All right, when we look at resilient children, which has a greater impact, early or later experience? So there are a lot of studies on resiliency with children growing into their adulthood. You're going to see resiliency quite a bit in psychology. And if you take on a clinical role of maybe going into therapy, you're going to see resiliency a lot. So resilience is a person's ability to recover from or adapt to difficult times. And it's really important when we look at that nature nurture debate because, do you ever wonder when you look at someone and you're like, wow, they've been through a lot and they are so resilient. They just keep on going. And then you might look at someone else that maybe hasn't gone through too much, yet they feel the burdens and the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they're not quite as resilient. That's all of that nature nurture debate. Some people just have that inborn innate resiliency, and some people really need to learn resiliency, or resilient behaviors. So resilient children become capable adults. So again, the nature nurture debate, it's huge, because they do a lot of adoption studies that of children that are reared from their parents at birth, and they grow up to be very resilient children, even if in a negative environment. Or the opposite could be true. So this is the reason that it is such a big debate, because both can coexist together. All right, so let's look at this Venn diagram. You've got physical processes, cognitive processes, and socio-emotional. So we have things that work alone, right? And then they all also work together. So you have processes that you develop with physically, cognitively, and socio-emotionally, and then they all kind of blend in together. There's that area that nothing is in isolation. So if we look at the physical, all right, we're gonna start with this. Is I'm just gonna run through really quick, because this is basically from beginning. So germinal period of, when a woman gets pregnant, the first 2 weeks, that is conception. That is when there's the little tiny zygote, right? Little tiny zygote. Then we've got the embryonic period. That's from weeks 3 to 8. These are very critical times right now. So a lot of cell differentiation is happening. Cells are rapidly growing in the thousands and the millions and the billions, I do believe. This is where organ formation is happening. And then you've got your fetal period. That is the largest span. That is from 2 to 9 months. So your first 3 months in a pregnancy are the most critical. And the fetal period is all the way from 2 months all the way to, birth. So this is the development of functionality. So everything is rapid fire growing. All of the cells, just you name it. It to this day, when I learn newer things about, cells and the embryonic period and the germinal period, all of that, it still ceases to amaze me. All right, teratogens. Teratogens are agents that cause birth defects. So teratogens are basically, I call them toxins or poisons. Anything that could harm the fetus. So smoking, drinking, any prescription medications that are not, approved by a doctor, anything that can cause harm to the developing fetus. So some examples they give in the text are smoking and alcohol. Those are the two biggest ones. Drinking, smoking, drugs, any substances can cause preterm and low birth weight for infants. So it's really important that, especially, I'm going to say throughout entire pregnancy, to refrain from smoking and drinking and any use of illicit substances. And if a person is, a heavy drinker before they got pregnant, or smoked or anything like that, you might be surprised on what your doctor kind of suggests you to do. But at the end of the day, it's really important to follow the orders of your doctor. All right, so when we look at reflexes, those are genetically wired behaviors. Those are just, they're pre-wired. Think of it like a computer. Everything is already plugged in and ready to go. So you already come with the set of, genetically wired things that you do. Some are, they're crucial for survival. Some persist throughout your life. So coughing, blinking, yawning, those are things that they don't happen all of the time. Some disappear with neurological development, like gripping, rooting, and Moro. So again, as you develop, you do these things, and then they kind of, you develop, and then they kind of go on into the abyss, if you will. All right, so This is a good little example chart of what these things look like in development. So rooting, these are things that are going to be milestones that doctors look for in an infant to make sure that they are meeting these developmental milestones. Because if infants are not meeting these milestones, they're going to start looking at some possible, birth defects or any kind of delayed disabilities, anything like that. So your doctors will always, do that week checkup, that month checkup, because it's very important that they check to see that your baby is properly rooting, gripping, doing the toe curling. They take the device and make sure that the child is doing all of the necessary things. They make sure that they have that startle reflex, and then the gallant. I call it gallant. Some people say gallant. So you can go ahead and take a look at this. All right, when we look at motor skills, during motor skill development, this is when the child is starting to gain control over themselves. They're starting to overcome that gravity, where, a child first starts walking and they're kind of like all over the place. So these are the times that motor skills are starting to become fine-tuned. This serves a baby's purpose. It's contributing to perceptual learning. And when we look at perceptual looking, so give babies a choice and measure their preferences. So there's I didn't put it in here, but there's a nice little discussion on perceptual looking. Children love to look and be close to their parents, to their caregivers, because they know their voice and they're very attracted to their parents. That's why you'll notice that babies and toddlers, they not toddlers, but more like babies all the way up to 18 months, they really follow your moves. They watch you like a hawk, everything that you do. Again, very attracted to faces. Very interesting there when you have, when you first have your infant, they are essentially, they're not blind, but they can only see, inches in front of their face. Once you start moving far apart, it's like a blur to them. So it's very important to be very up close and personal with your newborn little bundle of joy. All right, so more in your brain development, myelination continues after birth, synaptic overproduction. Eventually, there is this synaptic pruning. Development results from nature and nurture. Again, it's genetic and it's experiential. When you look at your dendrites, the axons, everything that's going on in the brain, you can see at birth, it looks very kind of like widespread. And then after a month, the dendrites really start forming and they start becoming more condensed. And then if you look at 3 months to 15 months, how much growth is happening. So I call these like just roadways that are going everywhere. So it's very interesting to look at birth all the way up to 15 months, how exponential that development is just in a little over a year. Here's another graph that you can look at from newborn all the way to adolescence when we're looking at the visual cortex, auditory, and prefrontal cortex like development. All right, looking at puberty. So during puberty, you've got rapid skeletal and sexual maturation. Puberty begins in early adolescence. It's age dependent. For girls now, it's starting a little bit younger. It's usually anywhere between 9 and 11. I think the text does discuss that. I think I have that in my presentation. Not quite sure. For boys, even girls too, but for boys, that's the oh my Lord, androgen. So that is testosterone. Genital development, height, and voice changes. You notice boys' voices become deeper. They get into that growth spurt. And then, of course, genital development occurs. When we look at estradiol or estrogen, that is, girls. Breast, uterine, and skeletal development happen very rapidly during this stage of life. So this is during puberty. All right, looking at the adolescent brain development. So early in your limbic system, this is when emotions are kind of running wild and learning emotional regulation or dysregulation. So the areas of the brain that are responsible for this are your prefrontal cortex. And when we look at the emotions of like anger and fear and all of that, that is the amygdala working. So you're looking at later brain development, that's in your prefrontal cortex. And that, again, it used to be the age of 25 is when your frontal lobe was fully developed. Now they've pushed it out anywhere from 25, the average is 27, and it can be all the way up to 32. And the studies that are coming out, from that is because our brains are developing faster, we get information quicker, so believe it or not, it takes longer for our brain develop because we don't have to wait anymore for things. If you think about, we used to have to wait for things, so things occurred over time. Now when we want something, it's like rapid development, and that's the reason they say that our attention span is less than a goldfish. And we've got heightened ADHD, heightened levels of anxiety, heightened levels of depression, and it all centers around a lot of different things that are changing our diet, social media. I could totally go down that rabbit hole, but that would be for another class. All right. So in this stage of later development with the adolescent brain, there's a lot more risk taking because adolescents have this somewhat complex that they can kind of do anything. They can cross the road without looking unless parents are like, make sure you check both ways. Make sure, unless it's like classically conditioned in your brain, right? We learned that about in the learning chapter, classical and operant conditioning. So unless you are really on your child about that, they're going to kind of go into their early maturation of brain development and just do. So it's really important to teach our children that. But, on the flip side of that, no matter what, they're still children and they're still developing. So they're still going to be riskier in their in their choices that they make. This is the reason that nature nurture, we've got to nurture that and be on them and in a kind and loving way to keep them safe. All right, when we look at early adulthood, peak of physical development. So, once you get into those early 20s, they say that's the begin of the decline. So it's about, I think it's 26 years old, begins that gradual but very slow decline. Now, I know that sounds a little nuts, like 26, what? That is nuts. But you know what? If you stay physically active, mentally active, you can feel like you're still in your 20s when you're in your 50s and even in your 60s. So it all depends a lot on how you also take care of yourself. All right, middle adulthood. Most lose height, many gain weight, menopause for women, late 40s, early 50s. Men start losing testosterone. So it's just that middle adulthood is it's kind of almost going back to puberty, right? That kind of like what is going on in my body happens again in middle adulthood. And then late adulthood, it's more of that acceptance stage. You already have that accumulated wear and tear of the body. You do have less ability to kind of repair. Used to be able to just jump up and go. Now it's kind of like, oh, my bones ache. It's not as, when I get out of bed, I feel it. So it takes a little bit longer to regenerate. So that's the reason it's really important to keep yourself going. All right, there are some different biological theories of aging. You've got the cellular clock theory, maximum number of cell divisions possible, predicts human lifespan of about 120 years if you're looking at this theory. Right, looking at Oh, this is just, I'm not going to explain this. You could just pause this and take a look at that. When it comes to the DNA stuff, I skip right over that. All right, we've got the free radical theory, cause DNA and cell damage. You've got the hormonal stress theory, hormones linger longer. Boy, I can't talk anymore. Whew. All right, some new neurons produced throughout life. That is called neurogenesis. Surviving healthy neurons take up slack for their decreased disabled neighbors. So basically, what it's saying is that even though the brain is aging, it doesn't mean that new neurons cannot develop. That is the idea of neurogenesis. It's just that we are declining. So it's not happening at that rapid speed anymore. There's a reduced lateralization of brain function. Both hemispheres are used more equally. When you're younger, your right side really compensates for the left and the left the right. But as we get older, both kind of like balance out each other. Still have a lot to go. All right, cognitive development. That is how thought, intelligence, and language processes change as people mature. Cognition is the operation of thinking. Just a couple little definitions there for you. All right, now we're going to go into some of these major theorists. Biggest one I'm going to go over is Erik Erikson. That is the one that we focus the APA paper. So the psychosocial stages of development. But first we're going to talk about our good old boy Jean Piaget. From 1896, lived all the way to 1980. So basically, he believed that children actively construct their cognitive world using some elements here. So schemas, which are those mental concepts or frameworks that organize information. So kind of how children kind of frame and look at themselves. This is Piaget's theory of development. And also in his theory, there is a term that he uses called assimilation. So this is how we incorporate new information into existing schemas. So you take new information in and you incorporate that into what's already into your world. And I will go over some examples with that. And then accommodation. So then we adjust the schemas to now that new information. So first we assimilate it and then we accommodate it. So it's kind of like a neighbor, right? New neighbor comes in and it's like, "Hi, stranger." And, they're like, "Hey, let me teach you some new things. Hey, let's learn some new stuff about each other," right? So neighbor then becomes your friend. So kind of assimilate into the environment and then it becomes that accommodation. All right, so let's look at Piaget's theory. So his theory, we've got the sensory motor stage. So he has his stages of development. And according to Piaget, the first stage that a baby goes through is the sensory motor stage from birth to about 2 years old. This is when the baby, the infant, the child, whatever, is coordinating their sensations with their movements. So all those movements that I talked about earlier. They learn what object permanence is. So object permanence is when a child is from birth to 2, right up before that, they think out of sight, out of mind, very egotistical. So if you walk away, you're gone. So if you have something right in front of them, and they watch you put it under, a blanket, they think it's gone. It's like magic. That's why peekaboo is so fun for them. They are like, peekaboo. It's like as soon as the hands go over the eyes, it's like magic, you're gone. And then you reappear. So in that, during that time, object permanence develops. So then they realize that even when we're doing this, you're still there. So once you get the object permanence, then of course peekaboo is not fun anymore. All right, progress from reflexive action to symbolic thought. So going from those reflexes to symbolic thinking. All right, next we have pre-operational stage. That's from 2 all the way to 7 years old. So this is symbolic thinking increased but limited. So we're still in the words and images stage. So using, small words, stringing to sentences, looking at images, those are more meaningful. This is a time where egocentrism is really big. So children are in that me, mine, not yours, it's me. They think in terms of themselves, and it's not because they're selfish, it's because it's what they know. The only world they know is them. So it's all about me, 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 me. Once they get past that stage, that's when they start learning that the world isn't just about them, and they learn the concept of sharing and giving and all of that other stuff. And that is when they also start learning that intuitive thinking. All right, landmark cognitive accomplishment of infancy. So again, when we look at that object permanence, you see in this picture, the baby sees this object, right? And if you put this wall up here, this partition, the baby thinks it's gone. It's magic, it's gone. Once they learn object permanence, they realize, hey, even though that wall is there, I know that my little toy is on the other side of that. Great. Now we're moving on to concrete operational. I used to love doing experiments on this one. All right, so this is from 7 to 11 years old. So this is when we're developing operational thinking, also known as conservation. So I used to do this, and it shows it in here too. If you give a child, let's say 4 to 5 years old, and you show them two glasses, right? Two glasses, different sizes, and you do the experiment with them, and you show them, hey, I'm going to pour this water in here, right? Are they the same? Are they different? Well, at that age, when we're in the pre-operational, before concrete, um, a child doesn't understand that even though, solid or whatever, the glass changes, they think the contents also change because they haven't developed that concrete level of thinking yet. It's not until they get into this stage of concrete operational, part of the theory, that they realize that even though you're putting water in this glass and one is tall and one is short, so of course it's going to look like the tall glass has more in it. But now I know through my age appropriate development that it's still the same. So I have a good video to show that shows that. This is when we begin to reason logically in those concrete contexts that I just mentioned. Actually didn't explain it very well, so that's why I have a video for it. All right, formal operational stage. That's from 11 to 15 years old. And that is the stage, that's the end. It continues, or no, sorry, that doesn't continue. These are your adolescent times. So, but it does continue through adulthood. So these are the times where now we're starting to rationalize things. We're making those developmental, permanent changes, and we start carrying those into our adulthood and beyond. So abstract and idealistic thought develops. You can kind of look outside the box. That's when you can think existentially, is during this stage. It's pretty much a little bit more to the 15 and beyond. And that's when you can, you have that hypothetical and deductive reasoning. So that's more higher level thinking. All right. Oh, let me go back to that. So as I was saying before, this is that experiment of conservation. I did it on my own children when they were 4 and 5 years old. And then I repeated the study at 7 and 8 years old. And I thought, because I was who I was, and I was, the teacher of this, and, my kids would know this, but they didn't. And that was quite interesting, showing at the end of the day, psychology is an amazing phenomenon. So in this, it's showing that, this is the same amount of water that's in here, that's in here. It's just when you've developed that conservation, the law of conservation, you know that even though this looks like there's more, no, it's still the same amount. All right, so other theories of intellectual development. So the nativist approach. So Piaget underestimated infant capacity. So with all theorists, there's going to be strengths and weaknesses to their thoughts. And so with Piaget, he did underestimate that with infants. Um, and then there's some information you can look up with core knowledge approach with Spelk that's in your text. We're going to discuss a little bit about Vygotsky and the cognitive development in the cultural context. So interpersonal process, child as apprentice to expert adult. So Vygotsky took on a little bit of a different approach. And his approach was through scaffolding. With children, when you scaffold, you kind of, you're the teacher, right? So you show. It's like the I do, we do, no, I do, we do, you do, right? So it's kind of like I'm gonna show you this, and then I'm going to watch you do that, right? And then that's kind of that approach that Vygotsky took. And then the information processing approach, cognitive performance depends on working memory. So it's looking at it more of like a kind of computer executive functioning approach. All right, we're going to skip on that. Again, so just something to touch on really quick is that Piaget did underestimate infant capacity, but he also overestimated adult capacity. So there were a lot of things in his approach that were, needing to be refined. But again, still a very good theory to still look at. All right, early adulthood, idealism gives way to realistic pragmatism, listen to me, reflection on worldview or philosophy of life. So when you're in your early adulthood, you're starting to kind of ponder things and look at things differently and being able to reflect on things and look at 2 points of view. You're not just looking at your point of view anymore. You're starting to kind of accept different worldly views. All right, when we get into that middle adulthood, 4 of the 6 cognitive abilities studied peak. So we're getting to that again, what I talked about before. When you get to that middle adulthood, you're kind of peaked there. You're kind of, that's kind of where it's at. It's not to say that old dogs can't learn new tricks, but that's like the peak of our development. Then we get into that late adulthood, and that's where, that wisdom really has set in. All of your life experiences have led up to you being this wise person. So wisdom isn't how smart you are. Wisdom only comes with age. So we see speed of processing kind of takes the decline. Memory retrieval skills decline. We don't remember as we did when we were younger. We forget more easily. That's the reason, when we talk about dementia and Alzheimer's, it's really important, especially if you have a genetic predisposition, to really take care of your younger brain. Because a lot of times when you're younger, you don't think about, getting older. So some aspects of cognition may improve when you're doing skills and doing things to keep your brain younger. All right, and again, wisdom increases in some individuals. So, they say that not everyone becomes wise, but in some ways I beg to differ. I believe as you age, you learn new. What you knew at 10, you didn't know at 5. In your 20s, right? You've learned from your teens. 30s, so much more. 40s, 50s, so you become wiser. It's in the book, in my perception, is when they say some individuals, because if you in your, whether it's in your teen years, in your adult years, if kind of life kind of gets in the way and you, become addicted to drugs, alcohol, any addiction, that's where wisdom can be stunted. So, it's not, across the board, I guess is my point. All right, so strategy training and physical activity can improve cognitive functioning. So again, like getting outdoors, doing puzzles, volunteering, being out there in the world. All right, let's skip over that. All right, socio-emotional development. So those processes involve changes in a person's social relationships, emotional life, and personality. So, as you age, you want to make sure that you're doing things and you're staying involved and you're part of the world and you're part of, a community, whatever that, means for you. All right, so temperament. When we look at temperament, that is an individual's behavioral style or characteristic way of responding. So, temperament is your style of behavior. So, chances are if you were a really anxious child, you have developed into an anxious adult. So, it doesn't mean that temperament can't fluctuate, but usually if you're really mild mannered as a baby, as an infant, as a little kid, you tend to stay mild mannered. Sometimes situational, things happen. All right, so we've got these other, types, the easy, difficult, slow to warm up children. This can happen because of parenting styles. If you are in a nurturing environment, chances are you're going to have a more, your child is going to be easy to, have an easier temperament style, more well-rounded, more laughter, more happiness. And then there's difficult, and that is just the complete opposite. And then there's that slow to warm up. There might be some ambivalence, that parents sometimes they feel loving and sometimes they're not. They're kind of keyed up off edge. So it causes that child to kind of absorb those behaviors. So just remember that whatever you absorb, it's like your children absorb like 3 times that amount. So it's really important to, when we're feeling things and going through things, to kind of take a step back and do that away from our kids. All right. Let's talk about infant attachment. The close emotional bond between infant and caregiver may provide important foundation for subsequent development. So the more you feel attached to your caregiver, the more you're going to feel attached to yourself and the world. All right, so you go ahead and click on this video that I, included. John Bowlby is like the big theorist of infant attachment. This goes into, it's an old video, but it's a very interesting video. So infant attachment lays foundation for all future relationships, according to John Bowlby. According to Mary Ainsworth, she did a very famous study called The Strange Situation. So this is just a couple minutes long. Highly encourage you to click on this and watch it, because this is one of those videos that you will see if you major in psychology. You're going to see this study a lot. All right, so caregivers leave infant alone with stranger, then return, and then they see how the infant reacts to their caregiver. And it says a lot about that infant to caregiver bond. If you leave your child with someone, right, and you have a secure attachment, they call it secure attachment and secure attachment. So if you have a secure attachment, right, then you may leave and your child is like, oh no, I don't like this. But then they can kind of soothe and then they're okay with the person. And then when you come back, they're so excited to see you. Versus if they don't have that secure attachment, it's almost like you left me. So when you come back, it's almost like they're going to make you pay. So they're not going to look at you. They're going to scream and they're going to shut you away. So it's a really interesting kind of phenomenon. All right, so secure attachment or insecure attachment. So go ahead and check out that video. All right, so attachment theory does not adequately account for cultural variations and temperament differences. Always, 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 we have to take into account culture and temperament, because one culture one culture is not the same as another. As we can see in the world, we have so many different cultural variations and temperament styles. All right, the Harlow study is a very famous study. This is an old study. I laugh every time I watch this because the acting is so bad, but it's so interesting. and funny. And it's also a major study in psychology when it comes to attachment. So it uses this little monkey, so cute, this rhesus monkey, on attachment style with a robot. Um, so a wire robot and then using a cloth blanket. So very interesting. Again, just take a couple minutes and watch that study. All right, so is it nourishment or contact that matters? So you'll know once you watch this short video. Very, very interesting. And in the study, they chose between two surrogate mothers. So one was a wire mother and with food versus one with just cloth. So contact comfort versus food. So watch that video and you'll see what the monkey chose instead. It's really cool. But obviously, if you just read it, you'll see infants preferred the cloth mother across situations because as humans, right, as little people, whatever, we want that nurturing. It's more important to have nurture than it is food. I mean, we need, food for survival, but, for our overall mental health and wellness, we need to have that contact. All right, so as it says, contact comfort is critical to attachment. If you don't have that, it leads to a lot of potential issues in adulthood. All right, so Erikson stages of development. This is the big one that we're going to discuss. This is why this chapter is definitely longer than 30 minutes. I'm not going to read each stage. You're going to find different things. I've attached this because I like how this breaks it down from the stages to the age to the psychosocial conflict. So what the conflict is trust versus mistrust. So when the child is from about, 0 to about a year old, it can fluctuate a little bit. This is when the infant learns to trust their caregiver to meet their basic needs, to be held, to be fed, to be nurtured, right? If they don't get those little things, they're not little, they're actually critical. If they don't get those things from 0 to 1, what's going to happen? They're going to learn to mistrust the world. Now, if they meet that, the basic virtue is they'll have hope. They'll already at 1 year old develop hope in their life. When you go to 1 to 3, autonomy versus shame and doubt. So now, actually, I will read this because it's important. So the basic virtue is will. They start to have this will. So toddlers develop a sense of personal control and independence. They're starting to walk, right? They're starting to gain this independence. So they start to do a little bit of things on their own. So if you're telling them, hey, you're doing a great job, then they're going to have that will. If you scold them and yell at them and make them feel bad, they're going to already at 1 to 3 start having shame within themselves and start doubting their own abilities. So we move on to 3 to 6. So this is what's important when you're doing your APA paper is when you're, doing this research, you could look at stages of your life and say, hey, there was a stage that I was stuck in because I didn't have these stages of development. They're fluid, right? If I didn't, you can be stuck in a stage. Your age keeps going, but mental can be stuck back. All right, so 3 to 6, we've got initiative versus guilt. That's when purpose sets in. So children assert control through directing play and social interactions. So this is when they're in kindergarten, right? They're preschool, kindergarten, they're learning, how to get along with other people, how to socialize, how to build things. And so, you've got a teacher that they're like, good job, Johnny, good job, whoever, and they feel really good about themselves. So they've got that initiative to keep on going. But if they're told that's wrong, that's not good, they start developing that guilt already. So we wonder, why when we get to the certain age in life, is it why do I feel so guilty? What makes me feel shame? It's it starts at a very young age. So if you have that development and you're meeting those milestones, then you're going to have initiative to move on to the next stage, which is industry versus inferiority. So 6 to 12. So that's when we develop competence. So children develop a sense of pride in accomplishments and abilities. So now we're at that school age, right? We're in elementary school. We're learning new skills. We're learning new things. We bring home those report cards. And even when we don't do our best, our, parents, our caregivers are saying, you know what? Good job. You are going to do even better next time, or I'm really proud of you. And that builds their confidence within themselves. But if they're told, how could you get this grade? What is wrong with you? Why aren't you as smart as your sister or your brother? Well, then guess what? That leads them to feel inferior. So again, you notice I'm inferior. I have this guilt. I have this doubt. I can't trust anything in my world. We wonder the reason when we get to that adolescence, we start making all these maybe not the best choices. All right, so 12 to 18, that's identity versus role confusion. So it's like, you know what? That's the fidelity stage. So teens explore personal identity and sense of self, right? Who am I? What do I like? Who do I like? What am I attracted to? Whether it's a person or an idea or my thoughts in the world. And when we are shamed, right? If you're shamed for these things, then that leads to that role confusion is I don't know who I am. I don't know my personal identity because I've been made to feel like I'm wrong or something is wrong with me. Okay. And then we go into 18 to 40. That's a long one right there. So that's intimacy versus isolation. That's naturally the next step in your life. After, school, if you go to college or if you go to, right into the workforce, that, you're leading up to this intimacy versus isolation. So that is where love happens, right? That when you choose to love someone. So young adults form intimate, loving relationships with others, or they don't, or it becomes isolation. So again, if you've been meeting all of these milestones, then it doesn't mean that you won't have heartbreak in your life, but you'll have that resilience because you've been able to get through some difficult times. So if you go through heartbreaks, it's like, yeah, this is terrible and I don't like it, but it's not a reflection of me. It's maybe it wasn't right for us because you're not confused about who you are and what you mean in the world. So hope that's making sense. And then we get to 40 to 65 years old, another big gap, 25 years. So generativity versus stagnation, and the basic virtue there is care. So adults create or nurture things that will outlast them, contributing to society. So in this age, they're working adults, they've had children, maybe they're, younger children, maybe even an adult now, and they're in the working world and they're like, okay, am I contributing to society? Am I serving my purpose? Am I working? Am I saving for my kids' future? All of these things. Or am I just stuck? Have I not really contributed? Or did the things of my life get in the way? Did I not get help for some issues I had? That's where stagnation comes from. You're stagnant and just, it's kind of like at a standstill. So then that leads us to the eighth and final stage is 65 plus, the rest of your life. That's ego integrity versus despair. That's wisdom, right? All your life for that wisdom. Seniors reflect on life and either feel a sense of fulfillment or regret. So that's when we look at legacy and we look back on our life and we're like, am I going to leave my kids a legacy? Not about money, but when I die, will my name carry on? Will I be in stories? Will I be remembered? Will, all of these things that, what did my place in this world, what did that leave for people? I'm sure you can think of people in your life personally or people that affected your life that you don't even know. And that's where you could look at that was a life well lived. Now, of course, I'm talking older, obviously, but these are very interesting stages and they're great stages of development to study. So, take a good look at this and really look at that as you incorporate this into your research paper. So hopefully that gave you a really good snapshot of all of Erikson's stages of development. Okay, so Erikson lived from 1902 to 1994. That's him right there. Go ahead, you click on this, and it will bring you to 8 psychosocial stages of development. Again, each stage represents a developmental task, results in either greater personal competence or greater weakness and vulnerability, which is what I went over. So I will kind of skip through things because I've already gone over them. So again, stage 1, trust versus mistrust. Birth to about 1.5 years. In the chart, it said 0 to 1. You got to give or take a little bit because children and adults, it's, it's a little bit fluid, but give or take 6 months. You've got next autonomy versus shame and doubt. Again, 1.5 years to about 3 years old. Then we got 3 to 4, stages 3 to 4, initiative versus guilt, and then industry versus inferiority. Erikson stage 5, identity versus that identity confusion. Who am I? Where am I going? We have Marcia's 4 identity statuses, identity diffusion, so no exploration or commitment. We've got identity foreclosure. This is just kind of a little thing into with Erikson. Commitment without exploration, that's foreclosure. We've got identity moratorium, exploration without commitment, and then identity achievement, commitment after exploration. So this is just a short one if you want to explore more of Marcia's 4 identity statuses. You can look at that in the text further. All right, marriage is kind of in that stage 6. Doesn't mean it's got to be in that stage, but usually it's in that intimacy versus isolation stage. And now more people now are waiting a lot longer to get married. We're kind of wondering if the tides are going to turn now. But it's very interesting how marriage used to be really young, and then it got older, and then it got younger. So it's kind of like we're looking at more of a later stage now. Principles for Successful Marriage by Gottman. The Gottmans, so husband and wife, they are, if you want to know anything about marriage, these are the experts, the Gottmans. They discuss nurturing fondness and admiration, turning towards each other as friends. It's very important to be friends with your partner, and giving up some power, not having to always be in control of everything, and solving conflicts together. They have a lot of great seminars, both virtually and in person. All right, stage 7, generativity versus stagnation. Winding down to the final stage, integrity versus despair. So what have I done with my life? Again, now what's very interesting about this stage is that, believe it or not, this stage has the highest rate of suicide is during the 8th stage. And that is because there is that mortality, looking at your mortality and what you've contributed to the world, and sickness and all kinds of things. So a lot of people get it very confused and they think it's younger, but essentially it's older. All right, so some strengths of Erikson's theory. So emphasis on development through, your life, important ideas about the central themes of various stages. But some criticisms of his theory relied heavily on case study research, left out some other important developmental tasks like dealing with careers and work, and little exploration of emerging adulthood. So again, he went over some pretty deep things, but some of these things were left out. So again, with any theory, you're going to have strengths and weaknesses. All right, let's touch on parenting styles real quick. And you'll be able to know where either you fall in as a parent or where your parents were. Authoritarian, they're restrictive, punitive, do what I say, not as I do. That type of parent. Correlated with child's lack of initiative and social skills. These children may have a lot of problems in life. Authoritative, those are your very balanced parents. They encourage independence, but they have limits. If you do something, you have consequences, but the punishment fits the crime, right? So correlated with child's social competence, social responsibility, and self-reliance. So this is the parent you strive to be. The neglectful parent. Parents generally uninvolved, hey, you come home, your curfew's 12, but you came home at 3. All right. So kind of just sweeps things under the rug, correlated with less social competence and poor self-control in children. And then your permissive parent, they're involved but place few limits. So that's, sorry, my bad. That the permissive parent is the one that sweeps everything under the rug. Not everything, but they're the ones that do kind of do that, I said this, but I don't want to argue with you. So, just go ahead, whatever. The neglectful one, that's the one that is just doesn't show up to any practice, doesn't do any of the things. They're pretty much, they're not there. So, all right, identity within a larger culture affected by the cultural message conveyed by others. So culture plays a huge role in identity. Right, I'm going to skip through a bit now. You can look through these because once we get to an hour, this cuts off. Gave you some information. I like that the text is incorporating more of gender development, talking about sex, gender, and gender identity. So these are some really good things that I like that we're seeing in the textbook now. Again, it's not much that they put in there, but you know what? It's a good conversation that they're starting to have. This is where, again, getting into a lot of the biology, sex, and gender that we're going to skip over anyways. You're like, yes, please, it's been an hour. Another thing that we're talking about now, cisgender, non-binary, transgender. So these are, they're important things that we have to talk about. And so it's good that they're putting this in the text. So there have always been people who exist outside the gender binary across history and cultures, but now it's more of a conversation. All right. We've got Kohlberg, another moral developmental theorist. So his theory, expands on pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Again, go ahead and look at this on your own. We're not really going to focus on Kohlberg's theory, but it is an important theory. We really heavily focus on Erikson in this for the purpose of this chapter. Definitely, how do we navigate grief? This is really important. So please click on this. When it comes to death, dying, and grieving, this is a very important topic to discuss. Kubler-Ross's stages of death and dying is one to talk about. And what I'm probably going to do is do a separate short video for this. I'm going to do that separately because this is one I don't want to rush through. So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, also known as DABDA. So I am going to do that in a separate video, but I wanted to run through all of this really quick. Go ahead, click on this video for George Bonanno, Measuring Human Resilience, another good one. As an active developer, you blaze your own path. Where will you go on your life path? How might you grow yourself? These are questions to constantly and consistently ask yourself. Where am I going in this journey called life? Click on this for attachment styles in relationships. Amazing. If you want to know some things about relationships and attachment styles, this is a good one. So go ahead and click on that. I'm done. I needed to keep it under an hour before it cut off on its own. So, that was a long one. So thank you for staying with me. Actually, I still had a minute to go, but it's a lot of information. I hope you just kind of stop and you didn't have to watch this all in one thing. I know you're probably like, I watched all of this. Where's the extra credit for the longest one? There is none. Not on this one. But that doesn't mean it's not in the next one. So make sure you watch the next video. All right. Have a great day, night, evening, whatever, wherever you're at. And I will see you in the next video. All right. Peace.